Hello, this is Dr. Tim Harrison, and I'm coming to you from the Institute of Advanced Studies in Religion and Philosophy from Bristol, Virginia, also known as my back bedroom, which is sort of well lit at the moment because it's daytime. And this week we're looking at the Gospel of Matthew. Now, Matthew's a very interesting gospel because it's thought to have been written by Matthew the tax collector. That's what traditional scholars believe. Modern scholars believe it was written by somebody who used his name. And what we see is a very Jewish gospel. Matthew is the most Jewish of all four gospels. And it's written in a way where there are these different forms of discourse that Jesus uses to teach his disciples. Now, some people believe that Matthew is sort of an abbreviation of Mark, expanded at certain places. They believe there's a relationship between the three Gospels, of course, the Synoptics. But most traditional scholars believe that it's just simply Matthew telling the story and telling it from his perspective because he was Jewish and saw the world through the eyes of the Jew. And he sees Jesus as the not only the interpreter, but the fulfiller of the Mosaic Law. And because of this, we see quite a few references to the Old Testament and to what the Jewish people believed was the fulfillment of the Messianic promise. And Jesus is seen by Matthew as the fulfiller of the Messianic promise. And so we see this, and it's also in Matthew that we get the idea of the church. Church simply means assembly or gathering together. And as they gather together, it's called the ecclesia. And the ecclesia gathers together, they come into what is known as koinonia, which is fellowship. And this is a binding agent that brings people together for a common mission and purpose in life. And we see this in Matthew, and then it's later sort of fleshed out by Paul the Apostle. Now, Matthew has a very important role because he connects Jesus to the lineage of the Hebrews. He also talks about the women in the Hebrew lineage that are connected to Jesus. That's very important and very unique for its time. And then he introduces the messianic promises and how Jesus fulfills those messianic promises. And also how he is the teacher, the ultimate teacher and fulfiller of the Torah, which means the first 5 books of the Bible. Now, again, we think that Matthew is the same Matthew of the New Testament. We see that he is demonstrating how Jesus has come for the Jewish people to show them the fulfillment of time. And what we have as we get into the text is Matthew talking about, he's the first to introduce Jesus as a child. And so there's some narratives that are a part of that. One of it is the identity of the Magi who come to find this young king because they are intrigued by a star that has appeared. They come from the east, which we believe are either Babylonian or Persian astrologers. They come to Bethlehem during this time. There is a census that is taking place, so they come to Bethlehem, which would be the historic home of Jesus and Joseph and Mary. And we see that King Herod is paranoid because they come looking for a king. And so he also wants to know who this king is. And when that is not fulfilled, we see that he kills many of the innocents, the young children, in order to try to call out one who might try to rise and take his place. So then we see Jesus grows up, and we see the temptation, same as what we saw in Mark. Satan comes and tempts Jesus in the wilderness, and this is sort of expanded a little bit. Again, the 3 types of temptation that we see is a fulfillment of personal need, the gain of public and worldly acclaim, and the gain of power by cruelty and violence. All of these things are believed to be the sins that human beings suffer under. Now, we come to the first discourse, and the first discourse is the discourse of the Sermon of the Mount. We see the Beatitudes. This is where Jesus says, blessed are, or happy are those that, and then he gives the fulfillment of that, and then he gives an antithesis. And the antithesis is that you have heard it said thus and thus, but I say thus and thus. So this is setting up a teaching method by Jesus where he says, you have heard religious leaders, you have heard the political leaders say, this is what is happiness, this is what is blessed. I say to you something different. And this was an extraordinary thing in Jesus' sermons and his methodology. And it opened up all of these poor and downtrodden people, these disenfranchised people, to come to understand that God loved them, even though the Pharisees said they did not, because they could not fulfill the law, they could not be clean. And so this is Jesus reinterpreting the Hebrew Scriptures. And so we see this opening up as a part of this first narrative. Then Jesus goes on and he fulfills certain miracles in the beginning of Matthew. And we see this as well where he begins to teach and perform miracles, healing, and also the miracle for a Gentile soldier. So all of that is very important for Matthew. Now, we also see that Jesus instructs his believers to go forth and to proclaim the gospel. The gospel means good news. Now, this is very important. This is something different about Christianity as it starts out. And that is that religion is not for a people. It is not to be held to a certain creed or certain group of people, a certain tribe, but it is for all humanity. So go out and proclaim this gospel. And he sends out what were known as the missionaries. And they had a very strong eschatological tone. Remember the word eschatological, or eschatology means end events. Not only does it mean the end events of the world, it means our personal end events, because we all will eventually meet our end. Okay? So the Son of Man, this is one of the descriptions of Jesus. The Son of Man goes out and he fulfills this. And we will continue this on our second video.